The condo board increased my monthly fees because I had too many cars, without realizing that I practically owned the entire neighborhood. For years, I lived under the strict rules of the community board, but now they had crossed the line by trying to charge me extra for parking my own vehicles in my driveway. What they didn't know was that, behind the scenes, I had been strategically buying up properties in the neighborhood for years. And now, it was time to show Daniela, our power-hungry president, who really owned this place. But would she accept defeat with dignity once I revealed my trump card? Welcome to my channel. Subscribe if you want more stories about condo boards and power-hungry figures. I never wanted trouble with the property management. Really, I didn't. But when I saw that bright orange notice stuck to my front door last Tuesday morning, I knew they were picking a fight. My hands clenched around the paper as I read it. Immediate increase in condo fees, $500 per month. Violation. Excessive vehicles on the property, 3 cars. That was it. My work truck, which I need for my construction business, my wife's SUV for her hospital shifts, and a used car we bought last month for our son's 16th birthday. 3 perfectly normal vehicles parked in our own driveway. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Daniela Martins, the condo board president, making her usual morning inspection, clipboard in hand and tape measure at the ready. As soon as she reached my house, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures again. The 3rd time this week. Honey, she's outside again. My wife, Juliana, called from the living room. Maybe we should just park our son's car in the garage. No, I said firmly, pouring my coffee. We're not going to act like we're doing something wrong. Our garage was already filled with Juliana's medical supplies and my work tools, which we had thoroughly explained at the last condo board meeting. That meeting, I couldn't forget the smug little smile Daniela gave me when I tried to explain our situation. Rules are rules, Mr. Morera, she said, barely looking up from her phone. If you can't afford proper storage space, perhaps this neighborhood isn't the right fit for your family. What Daniela didn't know, what nobody knew, was that over the past 5 years, I had quietly been buying up properties in this condo development through my real estate investment company. Whenever a house went up for sale, I used different LLCs to purchase it. At first, it was just a smart investment strategy, but now, it had become something much bigger. I walked to the mailbox, deliberately taking my time. Daniela pretended to inspect Mrs. Selena's flower beds while stealing glances at me from the corner of her eye. Poor Mrs. Selena. Last month, she was fined because her plants were too colorful and didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic. My phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. Final purchase completed. You now own 67% of the condo properties. I smiled, slipping my phone back into my pocket just as Daniela marched toward me, clutching her clipboard against her chest. Mr. Morera, she called, her voice sugary sweet. I assume you received our notice regarding the vehicle violation. I did. And actually, I have some questions about the legal basis for this fee increase. I kept my voice calm and professional. She waved a hand dismissively. The condo board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd have a better understanding of how things work. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. What she didn't know was that I had been attending every single meeting for the past 5 years. Through representatives from the other properties I owned, I had silently documented every instance of her selective enforcement, every questionable fee, every abuse of power. As she turned to walk away, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement, she called over her shoulder. Oh, and the board has scheduled an emergency meeting tonight at 7 o'clock sharp. We'll be discussing additional measures for problematic properties. I watched her leave, then pulled out my phone to text my lawyer. Time to prepare those documents. Daniela is making her move tonight. Just then, my son's car pulled into the driveway, and I saw Daniela stop to take more pictures. My blood boiled, but I stayed composed. Tonight would change everything in this neighborhood. But first, I had some calls to make. I walked back inside and spread out the property maps across the table, each lot carefully highlighted and coded. 5 years of meticulous planning, gathering evidence, watching Daniela's reign of terror over the condo board grow worse and worse. Tonight, she would realize that her biggest mistake wasn't just targeting my family. It was underestimating exactly who she was dealing with. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Selena from across the street, crying over yet another ridiculous violation notice. As I listened to her frustration, my eyes landed on a framed picture on the wall. My father, standing proudly in front of his first house, before an oppressive condo board forced him to sell at a loss. 20 years ago, he taught me to play the long game, to fight smart, not angry. I glanced at the clock. 6 hours until the meeting. Daniela wanted to play hardball over a few cars in my driveway? She had no idea what was coming. I walked into the community center's meeting room and could feel the tension in the air the moment I stepped inside. Every seat was occupied by neighbors I had known for years, sitting shoulder to shoulder, murmuring among themselves. Daniela had really outdone herself this time. She had even hired a professional photographer to take pictures of my driveway from multiple angles, making 3 perfectly normal cars look like some kind of illegal parking lot. "Let's begin," Daniela announced, striking her shiny pink gavel against the podium. She had scheduled this emergency meeting for a Tuesday night, fully aware that most working families would struggle to attend. But I made sure I was there, sitting calmly in the back row, watching her put on her usual performance. As you can see in these professional photographs, she began clicking through her PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Morera's property has turned into a used car lot. Gasps came from her most loyal supporters in the front row, the same people whose Christmas decorations stayed up until March without ever receiving a fine. I glanced around the room, noticing Mrs. Selena, my elderly neighbor, rolling her eyes. Last month, she had been fined because her grandson's car was parked in her driveway while he helped her fix the roof. Mr. Chun, the high school science teacher, was taking furious notes. He had received a violation notice because his car had been slightly outside his driveway line during the last snowstorm. Daniela moved to the next slide, displaying an enlarged photo of my son's car. This vehicle has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. Of course, she conveniently left out the fact that my son had come home from college for the weekend. The meeting dragged on as Daniela presented her so-called evidence, charts showing the decline in property values, complaints from anonymous neighbors, most likely her friends, and even weather reports suggesting that my cars were causing excessive snow buildup on the street. Furthermore, she continued, pulling out a thick folder, I have documented every instance of vehicles entering and leaving Mr. Morera's property over the past 3 months. My eyebrows shot up. Had she been tracking my family's movements? Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That's when Juliana Freitas, my next-door neighbor, stood up. Daniela, isn't this a little extreme? They're just normal cars in a normal driveway. Daniela's face turned red before she snapped. You're out of order. You have not been recognized by the chair. I watched as her husband, Robert, began passing out copies of a new proposed regulation, one that would limit each house to 2 vehicles and require all of them to be parked inside the garage. The sheer absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I scanned the room. Daniela was so caught up in her cheap theatrics that she hadn't noticed how the atmosphere had shifted. Some neighbors glanced at the papers Robert had handed out with pure disbelief. Others, like Mrs. Selena and Mr. Chun, were clearly holding back frustration. But there was something else. I recognized that uneasy tension, the discomfort of people who had always followed the rules without question but were now beginning to realize something didn't add up. And I knew exactly when to strike. Daniela straightened her posture, adjusting her glasses on her nose as she resumed her speech with that authoritative tone she loved so much. The committee has extensively discussed the impact that violations like these have on our community. And, as shown in the reports presented, it's clear that Mr. Morera's property is not in compliance with neighborhood standards. She paused dramatically, expecting murmurs of approval, but instead, she was met with silence. Oh, she was starting to notice now. That's why, starting next week, all homes will be required to comply with the new parking regulations. Any violation will result in an immediate $500 fine, and repeat offenses may lead to more severe consequences. She struck her gavel against the podium like a judge delivering an unchallengeable sentence. That was when I decided to speak up. And what legal basis do you have for this? The silence in the room deepened. Daniela blinked, clearly caught off guard that I had finally spoken. The community board has the authority to... That's not what I asked. I interrupted, keeping my voice calm but firm. I asked about the legal basis. Because, as far as I know, there's nothing in the condo regulations that limits the number of vehicles per house. Daniela pressed her lips together. The board has the right to modify the rules to maintain the neighborhood's value and harmony. But you can't just create new rules without the homeowner's approval, I shot back. Any changes to the bylaws need to be voted on and officially recorded. Anything else is just abuse of power. Her face reddened. The changes were approved by the executive committee. And who's on that committee? I asked, feigning curiosity. She hesitated. Everyone knew the answer, but now, with all eyes on her, it suddenly felt less legitimate. The executive committee was made up of Daniela, Robert, and two of her close friends, people who had never been democratically elected but had kept themselves in power because no one had the time or patience to contest it. Mr. Chun, who had remained silent until now, raised his hand. He's right. Changes like this have to be voted on. Daniela shot him a sharp look. If we have to vote, we will, she snapped, clenching her teeth. But in the meantime, the rules will take effect. That's not how this works, I continued. If you try to enforce these fines without legal backing, anyone can sue the condo board. More murmurs spread through the room. Daniela realized she was losing control. That was when she did the only thing she knew how to do. She resorted to manipulation. We only want what's best for the community, she said, her voice taking on an artificially sweet tone. Everyone here wants an organized neighborhood, free of violations that lower our property values. Funny you say that, I interrupted, leaning forward. Because as far as I know, your friend Carolina has 5 cars parked in her driveway, and she's never been fined. Daniela paled. Mrs. Selena crossed her arms. Now that he mentions it, I've never seen anyone give Monica trouble, and she has that huge trailer blocking the sidewalk. More voices started rising, bringing up cases of neighbors who had received absurd fines while Daniela's allies got away with everything. She swallowed hard, trying to regain her composure. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. I knew Daniela was controlling, but she had underestimated something important. People will tolerate power abuse only up to a certain point. Once they realize they're being played for fools, resentment spreads quickly. And I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. This meeting was a waste of time, a man near the door muttered. He stood up, crumpling the paper Robert had handed him, and walked out. Others started following suit. Daniela looked around, nervous, watching her authority crumble before her eyes. The meeting isn't over, she said, her voice coming out shriller than she intended. Oh, but it is, I replied, standing up. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lawyer to call. I walked out, feeling her gaze burning into my back. But this was just the beginning. Daniela had spent years using her position to punish people she didn't like, making up rules, abusing power with no one to challenge her. But now, she had messed with the wrong person. Because, in the end, this wasn't just about a few cars. It was about who really controlled this neighborhood. And soon, she would realize it wasn't her anymore. I spent the entire night reviewing documents, preparing every detail for what was coming next. Daniela wanted to play this game, then I was going to make sure she lost in the most crushing way possible. The next morning, I went straight to my lawyer's office. He already knew exactly what I wanted. With a folder full of official documents and property deeds, I sat across from him and let a small smile escape. It's time to change the rules of the game. That afternoon, while Daniela was still trying to repair her image after the disaster of the last meeting, I reached out to the other homeowners in the neighborhood. The way the condo board had been abusing its power bothered a lot of people, but no one ever knew how to fight back. I did. I drafted a formal notice calling for an emergency homeowners association meeting. According to the community's bylaws, any property owner could request a vote, as long as they gathered enough signatures to justify the need for a collective decision. And after the embarrassing spectacle of the previous night, gaining support was easier than I had imagined. By the end of the day, my proposal had been signed by more than half of the neighbors. Daniela had no choice but to comply. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, and I made sure everyone knew exactly what was at stake. That evening, I arrived at the community center before anyone else, carrying a stack of documents. I knew Daniela well enough to expect that she would try anything to stop me, so every detail had to be legally airtight. The neighbors started arriving gradually, many bringing copies of the notice I had distributed explaining the purpose of the meeting, an official vote to determine new rules for the neighborhood and to replace the condo board. At exactly 7 p.m., Daniela entered, and when she saw the size of the crowd, her face lost a bit of color. She walked up to the podium and tried to maintain her composure. "Good evening, everyone," she began, forcing a smile. "It seems Mr. Moreira has decided to call this meeting, so let's get straight to the point." "Yes, let's," I responded, standing up and walking to the center of the room. As you all know, the board recently tried to impose new rules without consulting the homeowners. Not only does this go against the principles of the community bylaws, but it also directly affects every one of us. Daniela crossed her arms. "Changes are necessary to maintain order in the neighborhood." "Order?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or your absolute control over everything." She remained silent. I continued. "That's why I propose an official vote, so that all property owners can decide whether these changes should be implemented." Murmurs began spreading through the room. And while we're at it, I also propose a second vote. The removal of the entire condo board. Daniela pressed her lips together. This is ridiculous. The rules exist to protect the value of our neighborhood. Then why are only certain people punished while your friends do whatever they want? I could see doubt growing on the faces of the neighbors. Then, I played my final card. As you all know, each property has the right to one vote in community decisions. That means if you own one house, you have one vote. If you own two, you have two votes. Daniela nodded, but hesitantly. That was when I pulled out a thick stack of documents from my folder and began distributing them. What no one knows, I continued as the papers passed from hand to hand, is that over the past 5 years, I have been quietly purchasing properties in this neighborhood, one by one. Daniela frowned. Mr. Chun, who was holding one of the sheets, widened his eyes. Wait, that means... I smiled. Yes, I own 67% of the properties in this neighborhood. A heavy silence fell over the room. Daniela froze. I turned to the neighbors, letting the information sink in. What does this mean? I asked, letting my voice echo through the room. That even if every single one of you votes against me, my decision is still the one that counts. I looked at Daniela and saw, for the first time, pure panic in her eyes. You can't. This is a setup, she exclaimed. No, Daniela. This is strategy. I turned back to the crowd. But I don't want to make decisions alone. I want this to be democratic. So let's vote. I took out 2 large sheets of paper and pinned them to the notice board. One read, revoke the new parking rules. Keep the rules imposed by the current administration. The other, replace the condo board. Keep Daniela and her council in power. I placed a ballot box on the table and crossed my arms. Each property owner gets one vote. I have 67 votes. Daniela tried to say something, but no sound came out. Mrs. Selena was the first to walk up to the table and place her vote in the box. One by one, the neighbors followed. Daniela watched, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for support. But no one was on her side. When everyone was finished, I picked up the ballot box and calmly began counting. In the end, it was almost unanimous. Daniela was officially out. The neighborhood not only rejected the new rules, but also voted to remove her immediately. She stood frozen, as if her brain couldn't process what had just happened. This can't be right, she murmured. Then she looked at me, her face filled with rage. You set me up. I just play by the rules, I replied, not bothering to hide my smile. She wanted to use the system to control others, but she forgot that sometimes the system can be used against her. And now, Daniela was nothing more than an angry ex-president who had lost everything. I held her gaze one last time before turning to the neighbors. From now on, this community will be managed fairly. Daniela stormed out, defeated, and I finally took a deep breath. The war was won, but there was still one last thing I needed to take care of. Daniela didn't know it yet, but I had a final gift for her. Something that would make sure she never tried anything against me again. But that would come on my next move. The meeting was over, but I knew that real change was just beginning. Daniela was gone, but her trail of favoritism, injustice, and abuse of power still lingered in the neighborhood. As soon as she stormed out of the community center, the room remained tense for a few seconds. Then, as if a dam had broken, the neighbors began murmuring among themselves. Some looked relieved, others were shocked at how the night had unfolded, and many were still processing the revelation that I owned the majority of the properties in the neighborhood. Slowly, I could feel their perception of me shifting. For years, Daniela had painted me as a problem, a troublemaker. But now the truth was out, and I was the only one who could ensure that no one else would ever suffer the abuses she had inflicted. I walked to the center of the room and tapped the table lightly, calling for attention. Change has begun, but we need to make sure this neighborhood is never again controlled by someone who uses power for personal gain. The neighbors nodded. That's why I propose that we appoint a new community board immediately. Someone who won't see this position as an opportunity for revenge or privilege, but as a service to the community. The neighbors murmured in agreement, and soon, names started being suggested. After some discussion and debate, we reached a decision. Sarah Jenkins, my neighbor, was elected as the new community board president. Unlike Daniela, she was known for her honesty and sense of fairness. She had also been one of the first to speak out against Daniela's abuses in the last meeting. Other members were also selected, people who were respected in the neighborhood and fed up with the way things have been run. With the new administration in place, I took my position as one of the primary decision-makers in the community. My majority ownership of the properties wasn't just a title. It was a responsibility. Now, it was time to restore order. The next morning, I sent an official notice to Daniela. As of that moment, she was formally banned from all homeowners association meetings and was no longer allowed to enter the community without prior approval. She still owned her house, but she had lost all influence over how things were run. She tried to resist. The very next day, she showed up at the community entrance, demanding to be heard. But this time, no one bowed to her demands. When she realized her voice no longer held power, the fury on her face was undeniable. She left, fuming, promising that this wasn't over. But the truth was, there was nothing left for her to do. Her reign was officially over. With the new administration came a period of restructuring. And the first major change was simple. The rules now applied to everyone. The same people who had once been protected by Daniela began feeling the weight of the new system. Carolina, her closest friend, who had 5 cars parked across the sidewalk without ever receiving a fine. Each of her violations now resulted in immediate penalties. Monica, who had been blocking the street with her oversized trailer, ordered to remove it immediately. And it didn't stop there. We conducted a full financial audit of the condo board and uncovered a mess of irregularities, unjustified fines, inflated fees, and unauthorized charges. All of it was revoked. Within a few months, the neighborhood went from a place of selective enforcement and favoritism to a community with fair, balanced management. And most interesting part, Daniela's so-called friends quickly abandoned her. Without the privileges she once granted them, each of them distanced themselves. Some tried to justify their past behavior, while others simply avoided confrontation. But in the end, not a single one of them defended Daniela. Months passed. The neighborhood had never been better managed. Homeowners, once silent, now actively participated in meetings. With the finances stabilized, we even managed to reduce some fees, improving the overall infrastructure of the community. And Daniela? She made several attempts to regain some influence, but none of them worked. One day, I received news that she had put her house up for sale. She couldn't stand living in a place where she was no longer the queen. A few weeks later, she moved away without saying goodbye to anyone. Daniela's empire had fallen, and in its place, we built a fair and just neighborhood. I never had to abuse power like she did. I simply used the rules against the person who had been twisting them for her own gain. And in the end, everything ended exactly as it should have. Over time, the neighborhood returned to what it was always meant to be, a peaceful place where the rules applied to everyone, without favoritism or persecution. Daniela's legacy was erased, and her name became nothing more than an unpleasant memory among the older residents. But this story wouldn't end without every piece finding its rightful place. Daniela disappeared from the neighborhood soon after selling her house. She tried to rebuild her life in another community, but it wasn't long before her reputation caught up with her. No homeowners association wanted someone with her history of abusive power. Over time, her friendships of convenience faded, and Daniela became just another bitter former president with no influence, no status, and no one to flatter her. From what I heard, she ended up moving to an ordinary neighborhood, where she had no control over anything. Carolina, once one of the biggest beneficiaries of Daniela's corruption, suffered the most from the new administration. Without the favoritism, she was forced to get rid of 3 of her 5 cars, since no one tolerated her taking up public parking spaces anymore. She even tried to convince the new administration to adjust some rules in her favor, but her requests were ignored. Eventually, she sold her house and moved away. Monica, the one who insisted on keeping her massive trailer blocking the sidewalk, didn't fare much better. After receiving multiple notices and fines, she was finally forced to remove it. Without the privileges Daniela had granted her, she had no choice but to start following the rules like everyone else. Despite everything, she remained in the neighborhood, keeping a low profile. Robert, Daniela's submissive husband, tried to remain involved in neighborhood meetings, but without his wife protecting him, it quickly became clear that he had nothing to contribute. Without Daniela to pull the strings, he became irrelevant. A few months later, the two got divorced. Daniela had always needed an environment where she could exert control, and once Robert was of no use to her, she discarded him without hesitation. He still lives in the neighborhood, but keeps to himself, never getting involved in community matters. Sarah Jenkins, on the other hand, thrived as the new head of the Homeowners Association. Under her fair and balanced leadership, the neighborhood became a much better place to live. With her in charge, fees were reduced, finances were reorganized, and improvements were made to the common areas. Her name became synonymous with competence and integrity. She remained in her position for a few years before passing the role to someone equally trustworthy, continuing to be one of the most respected residents. Mr. Chun, who had once been harassed and unfairly fined by Daniela, became one of the biggest beneficiaries of the new system. He now plays an active role in the community meetings and is a member of the neighborhood's oversight committee. The same man who was once targeted by unjust fines now has the authority to ensure no one else goes through what he endured. Mrs. Selena, our elderly neighbor who had been fined for something as ridiculous as the color of her flowers, was finally able to live in peace. Once all the absurd penalties were revoked, she could keep her garden exactly as she wanted. Never again did she have to worry about someone inspecting her plants. And as for me, I could have taken over as president of the Homeowners Association if I had wanted to, but that was never my goal. My role was to ensure Daniela lost everything she had used to manipulate others. And once I accomplished that, I left the administration in the hands of those who genuinely wanted to make the community better. But I still kept an eye on things. My majority ownership of the neighborhood properties never changed. Over time, I sold some homes to residents who truly wanted to be part of the community. But I always kept enough properties to ensure that if another Daniela ever emerged, I'd be ready to act. Years passed, and the neighborhood became exactly what it should have been from the start. No tyranny, no favoritism, just a place where the rules applied to everyone. Daniela tried to turn the neighborhood into her personal kingdom. But in the end, she was the one who ended up banished. And what remained was a united community, with no space left for small-time dictators. That was the true ending to this story.